Okay, continuing with the Ford and report from Iron Mountain. And this is part 2. Let's see, where am I? Okay. He may not be prepared for some of its assumptions, for instance, that most medical advances are viewed more as problems than as progress, or that poverty is necessary and desirable. Public postures by politicians to the contrary notwithstanding. Or that standing armies are, among other things, social welfare institutions in exactly the same sense as are old people's homes and mental hospitals. It may strike him as odd to find the probable explanation of flying saucer incidents disposed of en passant in less than a sentence. He may be less surprised to find that the space program and the controversial anti-missile, and fallout shelter programs are understood to have the spending of vast sums of money, not the advancement of science or national defense as their principal goals, and to learn that military draft policies are not only remotely concerned with defense. He may be offended to find the organized repression of minority groups, and even the reestablishment of slavery, seriously and on the whole favorably discussed as possible aspects of a world at peace. He is not likely to take kindly to the notion of the deliberate intensification of air and water pollution as part of a program leading to peace, even when the reason for considering it is made clear. That a world without war will have to turn sooner rather than later to universal test tube procreation will be less disturbing, if no more appealing. But few readers will not be taken aback, at least by a few lines in the report's conclusions, repeated in its formal recommendations that suggest that the long-range planning and budgeting of the optimum number of lives to be destroyed annually in overt warfare is high on the group's list of priorities for government action. I cite these few examples primarily to warn the general reader what he can expect. The statesmen and strategists for whose eyes the report was intended obviously need no such protective admonition. This book, of course, is evidence of my response to Doe's request. After carefully considering the problems that might confront the publisher of the report, we took it to the Dial Press. There its significance was immediately recognized, and, more important, we were given firm assurances that no outside pressures of any sort would be permitted to interfere with its publication. It should be made clear that Doe does not disagree with the substance of the report, which represents a genuine consensus in all important respects. He constituted a minority of one, but only on the basis of disclosing it to the general public. A look at how the group dealt with this question will be illuminating. The debate took place at the group's last full meeting before the report was written, late in March 1966, and again at Iron Mountain. Two facts must be kept in mind by way of background. The first is that the Special Study Group had never been explicitly charged with or sworn to secrecy, either when it was convened or at any time thereafter. The second is that the group had nevertheless operated as if it had been. This was assumed for the circumstances of its inception and from the tone of its instructions. The group's acknowledgment of help from the many persons who contributed so greatly to our work is somewhat equivocal. These persons were not told the nature of the project for which their special resources of information were solicited. Those who argued the case for keeping the report secret were admittedly motivated by fear of the explosive political effects that could be expected from publicity. For evidence, they pointed to the suppression of the far less controversial report of then Senator Hubert Humphrey's subcommittee on disarmament in 1962. Subcommittee members had reportedly feared that it might be used by communist propagandists, as Senator Stuart Symington put it, to back up the Marxian theory that war production was the reason for the success of capitalism. Similar political precautions had been taken with the better-known Geiter report in 1957, and even with the so-called Moynihan report in 1965. Furthermore, they insisted a distinction must be made between serious studies, which are normally classified unless and until policymakers decide to release them, and conventional showcase projects organized to demonstrate a political leadership's concern about an issue and to deflect the energy of those pressing for action on it. The example used, because some of the group had participated in it, was a White House conference on international cooperation, disarmament, etc., which had been staged late in 1965 to offset complaints about escalation of the Vietnam War. Doe acknowledges this distinction as well as the strong possibility of public misunderstanding, but he feels that if the sponsoring agency had wanted to mandate secrecy, it could have done so at the outset. It could also have assigned the project to one of the government's established think tanks, which normally work on a classified basis. He scoffed at fear of public reaction, which could have no lasting effect on long-range measures that might be taken to implement the group's proposals, and derided the group's abdication of responsibility for its opinions and conclusions. So far as he was concerned, there was such a thing as a public right to know was what was being done on its behalf. The burden of proof was on those who would abridge it. If my account seems to give Doe the better of the argument, despite his failure to convince his colleagues, so be it. My participation in this book testifies that I am not neutral. In my opinion, the decision of the Special Study Group to censor its own findings was not merely timid, but presumptuous. But the refusal, as of this writing, of the agencies for which the report was prepared to release it themselves raises broader questions of public policy. Such questions center on the continuing use of self-serving definitions of security to avoid possible political embarrassment. It is ironic how often this practice backfires. I should state, for the record, that I do not share the attitudes toward war and peace, life and death, and survival of the species manifested in the report. Few readers will. In human terms, it is an outrageous document, but it does not represent a serious and challenging effort to define an enormous problem. And it explains, or certainly appears to explain, aspects of American policy otherwise incomprehensible by the ordinary standards of common sense. What we may think of these explanations is something else, but it seems to me that we are entitled to know not only what they are, but whose they are. By whose, I don't mean merely the names of the authors of the report. Much more important, we have a right to know what extent their assumptions of social necessity are shared by the decision makers in our government. Which do they accept, which do they reject? However disturbing the answers, only full and frank discussion offers any conceivable hope of solving the problems raised by the Special Study Group in the report from Iron Mountain. And it is signed LCL, and for Leonard C. Lewin, New York, June 1967 is when he wrote that. And this will end the foreword, and then we will start into the book. And the next video will pick up. It's called Background Information, and it's like a little interview. This little interview, little question and answers thing. So from the author of this book, and then the unnamed Mr. John Doe, who was involved in this study group. Keep following along. It gets pretty interesting.